This is a quick video that describes the process to field adjust a brake motor. This happens to be a half-horse Leeson motor with a Stearns brake. These are common, or a derivative of these are common on some earlier EDI model distributors. The first thing you need is, on this model, is a 3/8 nut driver. Remove the two nuts that hold the can on the back. When you remove the can, you can see some of the components that make up the brake for the motor. There's a solenoid and a plunger assembly that engages and disengages the brake. This happens to be a motor heater that, when wired in, this is extremely hot, so it's naturally always better to do this with the power off. But at times, the brake on a motor, on a distributor, needs some attention. The pad, the brake disc inside the motor will wear, and it needs some adjustment from time to time. The solenoid works when it's energized, it releases the brake. And when it's de-energized, the brake is applied. And the best way to field adjust the brake is to confirm that it's coming loose, but when the solenoid releases, that you know you have pressure on the brake. Number one, now with the brake on, I can't turn the shaft of the motor, but when I release the brake, I can turn the shaft of the motor. There is a gauge that's mounted on the side of the solenoid. You utilize the set point is where the T-bar plunger lines up with that. As this brake disc wears, the plunger will move to a position that's a little bit higher when it's de-energized, and eventually, if it gets high enough, when it engages, it can't fully release the brake, and it doesn't put pressure on the brake when it's de-energized. The two screws that adjust the brake are mounted on this spring-loaded pressure plate, and they transfer the spring load into and on the rings that compress against the disc of the brake. So generally out in the field, when you would find this in need of adjustment, I'm going to loosen these screws, and you can notice the plunger comes up. You might find it in a condition like that. To run it back down to where it's in the neighborhood of being right, it's when the bottom of the T-bar lines up with this notch that says set on the little set card. This happens to be about a 1/2 inch on this model, and most of them are similar. Before you start, it's always a good idea to measure these two screws, how far they protrude out past the pressure plate. I take anything that I can write on, and use a pen and put a mark to make sure both sides are the same before I start. Then I know where I was at when I started. This one, with it out of adjustment, what I do is gently crank both screws until I'm back near the set point. And then to confirm that we're in the right place, I check the measurement on the screws, and I'm even on both sides, which is important. And then I manually activate the plunger of the solenoid, and I can tell there's no spring pressure on the disc or the plates inside the brake, and when I release it, I can tell there is pressure. Same thing when I rotate the motor with the solenoid retracted. I can rotate the motor. When I release it, now I can't rotate the motor. So we have the brake adjusted, and that's a good way to field adjust a brake on most of the EDI older versions that have a brake motor. Once you get the brake adjusted, then it's simply put the can back on. There is a manual release for the brake that you want to make sure that it's functional when the cover goes back on. Line it up, and then you check to see that it's functional, and it's functional. Reinstall the retaining nuts. And re-energize it and give it a test run.